In this video, I'm going to show you how I replaced the mesh in these fursuit eyes to give it a fresh new look that greatly improved the vision and durability. Hi, I'm Kazul and welcome to my lair. In my video about how I clean costumes, I had to remove Frostee's eyes to keep them from getting damaged. And since they were out of the head anyways, I thought it was a great time to replace the mesh for an upgrade. This is a fairly straightforward process, so let's commence the creation ritual. So as I showed in my cleaning video, the first step was to remove the eye from the fursuit. I just used my X-Acto knife to very carefully go around, cutting the hair away from the hot glue that held the eye in place. You can see the construction of the eye is pretty simple. It's a curved plastic shell with the buckram mesh and then some black felt on the back. The black felt helps block the light from bouncing around and creates a sort of like the eyelash or eyelid area. When I cut them out, I kind of got a little bit into the foam, especially on this right eye, but it'll be okay because the eye covers up that area when I have to put it back in. Here's the mesh that I'm going to be replacing the mesh in the eye with. This is actually a solar window screen. It's meant to block out 70% of the sun, and it doesn't fold or get creases. It doesn't warp. I think it's fiberglass with a little bit of coating. And here's a little piece that I painted so you can kind of see the bright colors that you can get on it. I love that you start with black because you need that on the back anyway, and the paint isn't scratching off. Now, I did seal this one a little bit with some crystal clear. That kind of made it sticky, so I used some baby powder to make it not sticky. On the back, you can see there was a little bit of paint bleed through, but it doesn't affect the vision that much. So the first step, I needed to separate the felt from the rest of the eye, and this was the hardest part because like a story when we first got Frostee is my husband, he was my boyfriend at the time, his dog had eaten the mesh out of the eyes like within the first week that he got it brand new. So past me has replaced this mesh before, and I used way too much hot glue. So if you didn't know, isopropyl alcohol kind of makes hot glue pretty brittle. So that was my strategy here, was to put a whole bunch of isopropyl alcohol on it to help pry it off. The heat gun, I was worried that it was going to warp the plastic, so I stopped using that. And the isopropyl alcohol worked really good. It was still just like a pain to get off. There you can see just how much glue is there and how little it actually, like, it was just way too much glue. So ripping out the mesh was pretty easy because it's very brittle. And for the rest of it, I sat there for a while trying to scrape at the hot glue, and it just wasn't coming off. So I resorted to just kind of soaking both the eyes in some isopropyl alcohol for a few minutes, and that finally let me just peel up the hot glue really easily. And it also got rid of some of the Sharpie marks that were on the inside of the eye anyways. Yeah, don't ever use this much hot glue. You don't need that much. So with a little bit of a wipe down, I wanted to really clean up that plastic, so I took a little magic eraser on the outside to just brighten it up, brighten up any of the plastic if there was any yellowing or dirtiness, just to make them clean and bright. Now is on to painting. The first step was I used a little bit of a pencil to draw me out a little bit of a guide. Now I could see that guide through the mesh as I was working on painting, and I just used that to kind of give me a rough idea of where the outside sclera would be and what would be seen through the mesh. So my strategy for painting is basically dry brushing. Since you don't want the paint to soak through to the back, I'm just doing a bunch of layers, light layers to build up a paint surface. So it takes a little bit to uh, brighten it up from black, but it's worth going slow because you won't have any of that paint bleed through. I recommend using an old paintbrush for this, one that you don't care about getting ratty. You see on that eye, I kind of bled through, but I could quickly wipe it off with a rag. After many light layers of dry brushing, I decided that it was bright enough for me and that I was ready to go move on to do like a little bit of a darker gradient on the top. Having this gradient on the top, it kind of just it's what anime characters do a lot with their eyes. It kind of simulates the shadow that gets overcast by your top eyelid. And I think it looks good. And so just with more dry brushing of the two colors and blending it together, I was able to get what I thought was a nice looking gradient. And still with minimal bleed through on the back. If you ever do get a little bit too much paint on there and it blocks the little holes in the mesh, you can take and blow really hard through the mesh and it'll kind of blow that paint out of the way, so that that vision hole will still be there. So I'm happy with the gradient now. It's time to paint in the pupil. Now I just took a Sharpie on my little mat pattern so that I could see better the shape of the pupil. Like there you can see the paint was a little too thick and blocked through the thing, and I just blew and used my brush to uh, make sure that those holes were open. Now I just transferred over the other mesh to get the exact same shape and size of pupil on both of them. And I think it's looking good so far. You can go a little heavier on black paint because if it does bleed through, it's going to be black, so that's fine. But still, it does clog up the little holes if you use too heavy of paint. After we let the pupils dry completely, it'll be time to paint on the eye shines. So I'm just taking my pattern and drawing a little bit of a guide for myself of where I want the shine to be and repeating the process, but with white. Now the white is a bit tricky because you want it to be thick enough that you can't see the other colors through it, but it's really obvious if it gets on the back. So just be careful, opt for lighter layers to and let them dry in between, and you'll be able to get the complete coverage that you want. See that one, I went a little too thick and it got on the back. Not a big deal. You could touch up the back after with black paint if you want. Oh, and if you still find paint that has dried that has some holes, you can take a pin and poke out all those little holes too. There's what the eye will look like. It's time now to get ready to glue them in place. So with a little ring around the edge of the opening, I just glue it in. And be careful, this is a mesh. The hot glue will squeeze through the holes, so use a small amount of hot glue and be careful with your hands and your fingers that you don't burn yourself. And then you can just trim away the excess. Now it's time to get these pieces of felt back on in place. I'm just taking a little bit of time to peel off some of the extra hot glue that's all over it, using my isopropyl alcohol trick again. And I was able to pull off some clumps of it, cutting very carefully with a little scalpel just to reduce the bulk. That's one thing I hate about hot glue, is that if you use too much, it just adds a ton of bulk. Anyway, my lesson learned from last time, I did not use near as much hot glue to glue down this piece of felt as I did before. Just a bit around the edge is more than enough. Now there's a ton of glue on this back that I just decided to shave off with a scalpel. It's very sharp, so be careful of your fingers. Don't force it too hard. I really needed to get rid of some of that bulk. There was so much hot glue on the back of these. Getting rid of the bulk on the back will help me place the eyes better when I place it back on, so that they'll be more flush with everything and be able to fit and sit better. So it's time to glue the eyes back in place. And at the same time, you can clean up the edge a little bit too. The first eye is always a little bit easier because you can put it wherever. Trying to get the other eye to match is a little trickier. So I decided, after looking at it a little bit more, that I didn't like the placement of that eye, so I kind of decided to move it around. Just pop it out of place and shifted it a little bit. And there we go. He's all done. Looks nice and clean and refreshed. My husband is very happy with the results. He loves how the eyes look bright and happy, and loves how much easier it is to see through. I hope you enjoyed seeing how simple this upgrade went, and hope it helps you in your own costume creations. Remember, you can find links to purchase the mesh in the description below. With that, I'm Kazul, reminding you to embrace your inner beast.